In March 1984, 27 wild turkeys from Missouri stepped out of transport crates into the snow-covered hardwood forests of southern Ontario. They were the first wild turkeys on Canadian soil in 75 years. The species had been declared extirpated from the province in 1909. It had been hunted out and logged out of every forest it had ever occupied. Over the next 3 years, another 247 wild trapped birds followed from 6 American states. That made a total of 274 turkeys, and Canada did not pay cash for a single one. It paid in animals, trading moose to Michigan, river otters to Missouri, and gray partridge to New York, in what may be the most creative barter deal in the history of North American wildlife management. By 2007, the Ontario wild turkey population had reached an estimated 70,000 birds. Today, eastern wild turkeys occupy every county in southern Ontario and have expanded well beyond their known historical range, northward into the boreal shield, into landscapes where no record suggests they ever existed before. They are breeding in fragmented agricultural woodlots, in suburban backyards, and in dense northern forests that biologists in the 1980s assumed were too cold to sustain them. Then researchers started looking at what the birds were doing to the forest floor and found effects that are more complex and more contested than anyone expected. What follows is the complete account. It covers the unregulated hunting that erased turkeys from Ontario, the cross-border animal swap that brought them back, and what 40 years of data are now revealing about what happens when you return a large, ground-scratching omnivore to forests that have been running without one for nearly a century. The typical video about wild turkeys shows you a gobbler strutting and calls it Thanksgiving. This one tracks the data 40 years forward into the failed pen-raised releases, the wild-trapped strategy that worked, the population explosion that overshot every projection, and the emerging science of what a flock of turkeys actually does to soil, seeds, and insects when it scratches through a hardwood forest floor every single day. The evidence behind every claim draws from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources 2007 Wild Turkey Management Plan, peer-reviewed research on turkey foraging ecology, and the Ostfeld and Lewis 1999 Tick Predation Study. None of this is speculation. This is what the management records and the field data actually document. To understand what the turkeys are doing to Ontario's forests now, you first need to understand what the wild turkey actually is, because if you only know this bird from a Thanksgiving centerpiece, you are missing nearly everything that makes it ecologically important. The eastern wild turkey is not the fat, white, domesticated bird Americans eat in November. It is a large, powerful, forest-adapted omnivore that can fly at 55 miles per hour, run at 25 miles per hour on the ground, and roost in the canopy of mature hardwoods every night. An adult tom weighs between 16 and 24 pounds. Both sexes have powerful legs and oversized feet equipped with strong claws designed for one specific behavior: scratching. From dawn to dusk, wild turkeys walk through forests and field edges, using those powerful feet to rake through leaf litter, turn over soil, and expose the seeds, nuts, insects, and invertebrates hidden beneath. A flock of 20 or 30 birds working through a woodlot over a winter can turn over a significant portion of the forest floor's surface litter. They eat acorns in enormous quantities, carrying them in their crop and depositing them far from the parent tree. They eat beetles, grubs, ticks, grasshoppers, and caterpillars. In the pre-settlement forests of Ontario, the wild turkey was part of the biological machinery that cycled nutrients, dispersed seeds, and maintained the structural diversity of the forest floor. Further into this video, you will see exactly what 40 years of that machinery running again has produced. The ecological effects are more complex than most conservation narratives acknowledge. The question that comes first, though, is how Ontario lost the wild turkey in the first place. Strip a large ground-foraging omnivore from a forest for 75 years, and you do not just lose a bird, you lose the scratching, the seed dispersal, and the soil disturbance that the forest floor had calibrated itself around for thousands of years. The wild turkey was once common across the mature deciduous forests of southern Ontario. It was reported as far north as Lake Simcoe and documented archaeologically as early as 900 AD. Then, within 30 years, unregulated hunting and the massive clearing of native forests for agriculture eliminated the species entirely. The last confirmed wild turkey in Ontario was recorded in 1909. For 3/4 of a century after that, nothing. The recovery effort that followed would take 2 decades, require a failed first attempt, and depend on a species-for-species barter with 7 American states, and it nearly collapsed before it started. Ontario's first approach used pen-raised turkeys. These were birds hatched in captivity and released into the wild. It failed. Pen-raised turkeys lacked the survival instincts of wild birds. They did not know how to find food in a forest or how to evade predators. Most died within weeks. The lesson was clear: you cannot factory produce a wild turkey. You have to start with a wild one. Starting in 1983, the Ministry of Natural Resources pivoted to a new strategy: trap wild turkeys from established American populations and release them directly into Ontario. The currency was wildlife. Missouri sent turkeys and received river otters. Michigan sent turkeys and received moose. New York sent turkeys and received partridge. The first release took place in March 1984 at Bacchus Woods. 27 Missouri birds were turned loose in one of the last remaining tracts of old-growth Carolinian forest in Ontario. Over the following 3 years, 247 more arrived. The total program cost was 120,000 Canadian dollars, of which the government contributed just 20,000 Canadian dollars. The population response over the next 3 years was so explosive that the management plan had to be rewritten. The wild trapped birds survived and bred fast. By 1986, Ontario's own trap and transfer program was underway, catching turkeys from established flocks and relocating them to new sites. Over the next 2 decades, approximately 4,400 wild turkeys were trapped and released at 275 locations across the province. By 2007, the estimated population was over 70,000. The species had recolonized its entire historical range and expanded well beyond it, pushing into the boreal shield where turkeys had never been documented. The population numbers, though, were not the real revelation. It was what the turkeys started doing in the forests they occupied and the myths that grew up around them. By the mid-2000s, wild turkeys were established across a range considerably larger than their historical footprint. They had colonized fragmented agricultural landscapes, including small woodlots, hedgerows, and suburban lots. These were habitats the 1984 planners would never have considered suitable. The birds exploited warmer winters, changing land use, and their own remarkable behavioral adaptability. That expansion is where the science starts getting genuinely surprising, because what 70,000 wild turkeys are doing to Ontario's forest floors is now the subject of active ecological investigation, and the findings cut in directions that neither the celebrators nor the critics expected. On the ground level, the first discovery was mechanical. Research on turkey foraging ecology, including direct studies of leaf litter disturbance and seed germination, has documented that turkey scratching exposes buried seeds to light and air, creates germination sites for tree species including oaks, and alters invertebrate community structure in the leaf litter layer. In forests where turkeys have been absent for decades, the litter layer compacts into dense, undisturbed mats that suppress germination. The return of turkeys breaks that mat open. For Americans, this is the same mechanism operating across the entire eastern United States, where the wild turkey restoration, from 30,000 birds in the 1930s to over 6 million today, is one of the greatest conservation successes in American history. The scratching, however, was only half the story. What the turkeys did and did not do to the broader food web demanded a different kind of attention. One of the most persistent claims about wild turkeys is that they control tick populations and therefore reduce Lyme disease. The logic is appealing. Turkeys eat insects, ticks are insects, therefore turkeys must eat ticks. A 1999 study by Ostfeld and Lewis in the Journal of Vector Ecology tested this experimentally and found it does not hold. Turkeys are not significant tick predators, and they themselves serve as tick hosts. The net effect on tick populations is essentially zero. The myth persists because it feels right. The data does not support it. This matters because it illustrates a broader principle. The ecological effects of returning a large bird to a forest are real and significant, but they are not always the effects that popular narratives expect. The third revelation was cultural, and it cuts both ways. In rural Ontario, the return of the wild turkey has been broadly celebrated. Hunting seasons opened in 1987 and have expanded steadily. But as populations have grown, human-turkey conflicts have increased in suburban areas. Turkeys scratch through gardens, roost on rooftops, and occasionally intimidate pedestrians during breeding season. The bird has become a victim of its own success, abundant enough to be a nuisance in places where, a generation ago, it did not exist. For Americans, the same tension is playing out in Massachusetts, New Jersey, and California. The management challenge is identical everywhere. Restored turkey populations meet suburban landscapes. The Ojibwe name for the wild turkey is Missis, big bird. That name outlasted the extirpation. For 75 years, the forests of southern Ontario carried the memory of a bird that no living person had seen in the wild. The word persisted in the language like the Irish Iola Mara or the Scottish Beobha, a name describing an animal that had been erased from the landscape but not from the vocabulary of the people who once lived alongside it. Now the animal is back. The name carries weight again. And the scratching, the constant methodical turning of leaf litter by powerful clawed feet, exposing seeds and soil that have been buried under decades of undisturbed forest floor, is reshaping the ecology of every woodlot in southern Ontario, one rake at a time. 274 wild-trapped turkeys, 7 American states, a barter deal paid in moose, otters, and partridge, a total cost of $120,000, and 40 years later, a population of over 70,000 birds occupying a range larger than their historical footprint, scratching through forest floors that had not felt the weight of a turkey's claw in 3/4 of a century, and generating a debate about what it means for a species to come home to a landscape that moved on without it. Canada is not the only place where a returned species is transforming a landscape in ways no one anticipated. In our next video, we go to Idaho, where in 1948, a state wildlife officer threw 76 live beavers out of an airplane using surplus World War II parachutes, dropped them into a valley that would become one of America's largest protected wilderness areas, and accidentally started an ecosystem restoration experiment that has been running uninterrupted for 77 years. If you thought 274 turkeys traded for moose and otters could reshape a province, wait until you see what 76 parachuting beavers did to 2.3 million acres of American wilderness when nobody was watching. You will not look at conservation the same way again.